Good morning. Today I shall start one of the important manifestation of the GI tract, or the symptoms or the signs of the GI tract, that is vomiting. Now, the vomiting is a process in which the contents of the stomach is expelled out through the mouth through an excessive propulsive peristaltic movement. Now, why there is a vomiting? What triggers vomiting? In order to understand the different drugs which are effective in vomiting, one must know the different mechanisms involved in the different mechanisms and the different receptors which are involved in the process of vomiting. Now, the vomiting centers are present in the base of the fourth ventricle, which is not covered by the blood-brain barrier. Therefore, it can easily analyze the toxic material which is detrimental to the central nervous system, and the process of vomiting starts. Now, the different centers which are involved in the vomiting is the higher center, then the vomiting center, and nucleus tractus solitarius, chemoreceptor trigger zone, cerebellum, inner ear or the middle ear, and pharynx. Apart from this, there are certain substances, when their level in the blood increases, the vomiting starts. It may also be induced if the stomach is irritated. On that time, vomiting is also induced. Now, the different receptors which are present in the nucleus tractus solitarius are cannabinoid receptors, 5-HT3 receptors, D2 receptors, M1 receptors, H1 receptors, and NK1 receptors. And these are stimulated by, if the pharynx is stimulated, from the pharynx through the vagus and the glossopharyngeal nerve, sensory input goes to the nucleus tractus solitarius, and through stimulating the different receptors, it induces vomiting. Chemoreceptors trigger zone has got the receptors for the 5-HT3, D2, there's the dopamine 2, M1, and the cannabinoid 1 receptors. The inner ear or the middle ear may be damaged through the aminoglycoside, which is a group of drugs, and may lead to this vomiting process. At times we get vomiting when we are in the motion. On that time, the cerebellum is stimulated, and the different receptors present there in the cerebellum are M1 and H1. Therefore, if there is a motion sickness induced vomiting, on that time, the drugs which are effective in pharynx induced vomiting will not be effective. So in the motion sickness, different drugs effective are M1 receptor antagonist or antihistaminics. Now, as I said, keeping this in view, the drugs for the vomiting can be classified as it may be muscarinic 1 receptor blocker, that's the anticholinergic, and the drugs are hyoscyamin or the scopolamine. These are drugs which are effective in M1 receptor, that is the motion sickness. This drug will be effective. Generally, in GI tract, we give the drug that is. There's a very common, if the GI tract is stimulated, on that time, the drugs which are D2 receptor group of drugs which are effective in vomiting due to this GI tract induced vomiting. On that time, the drugs are metoclopramide, or you can give other drugs like chlorpromazine, which is also a dopamine receptors blocker, or prothiazine. Chlorpromazine can be given. One point should be kept in mind that vomiting should never be encouraged except in case of poisoning. Now, if the vomiting is induced by cytotoxic group of drugs, are not cytotoxic drug used for the anti-cancer like cisplatin, on that time the big list of drugs which are given, which are 5-HT3 like granisetron or ondansetron or the cetron group of drugs are used here. Big list of drugs are there which can be given. Many times, in spite of cetrons, are also indicated if post-operative vomiting. If cetron fails, you have to have other group of drugs, and those are, it may be cannabinoid 1 receptors antagonist, that is dronabinol. Dronabinol generally acts on the in cisplatin induced vomit. On that time, dronabinol may be used. The other drugs which can be used in vomiting is NK1 receptors blockers like aprepitant or the phosphaprepitant. Aprepitant and the phosphaprepitant are metabolized by CYP3A4. Therefore, other drugs which are metabolized through CYP3A4 like cisapride and others should not be a co-prescription. Now, these two drugs are generally effective if the first line drugs are not effective in anti-cancer induced vomiting. On that time these drugs are given. Now, benzodiazepines also given in anti-cancer induced vomiting, and other drugs which can be given in anti-cancer induced vomiting is dexamethasone. The basic mechanism how benzodiazepines and dexamethasone acts as an anti-vomiting is not exactly known. It is said the benzodiazepines, that is diazepam, they allay the anxiety of the cancer and they are effective. Patient goes into sleep. Dexamethasone, what it does, suppose there is a tumor in the brain or there is a tumor, it decreases the inflammation and the pain of the inflammation is reduced and therefore the vomiting is also reduced. Now, this is a very uncommon drug, phosphorated carbohydrate solution. It is available in the market as a material or something like that. It contains phosphoric acid, glucose and fructose. It is marketed like this in a packet and it is promoted as a anti-vomiting or anti-emetic. So these are the different mechanisms. Antihistaminic group of drugs are generally cyclizine, then cinnarizine, so these are the drugs, diphenhydramine, so these are the drugs. They are generally used for motion sickness. Suppose it's very common among susceptible people that when they move or in sea voyage, in ship, this motion sickness generally starts and this group of drugs are effective. So this is in brief the different drugs which are effective in vomiting, to treat the vomiting. Let me sum up. Vomiting is the unpleasant sensation where the unpleasant condition where the content of the stomach is expelled out, the GI tract is expelled out, the violent antiperistaltic movement. It may be preceded by an unpleasant sensation, what we call as nausea. The word nausea is obtained from the nautia, that means the ocean, and the vomiting and the nausea, that is, and the symptom we call as a nausea. Now, the different mechanisms which are involved in the vomiting are, it may be due to the local cause or it may be due to the systemic cause. The local cause, the GI tract may be irritated, or the systemic cause, like there may be some blood-borne toxins which may be inducing the vomiting. If the ear is diseased, there is the vomiting. If the pharynx is stimulated, what we call the gagging, there will be vomiting. And whenever there is a toxic substance in the blood on that time, these are the different centers which are stimulated and may lead to vomiting. And in those centers, certain receptors are found in the nucleus tractus solitarius, because this is called solitarius because nucleus is at a separate site, lying solitary, single nucleus. We call it the nucleus tractus solitarius, and the different receptors available here are the CB1, the cannabinoid 1, 5-HT3, dopamine of the two varieties, second D2 variety, muscarinin 1, histamine 1, and NK1. There are three varieties of NK receptors, so NK1, NK2, they are all substance P antagonists. In the substance P, act to the NK1, NK2, and NK3 receptors, out of which in vomiting NK1 is involved. Others, the action of the other receptors for the substance P, that is NK1, 2 and 3 are not very clearly known. So this is your 10th cranial nerve, that is your vagus. This is glossopharyngeal nerve. If they are stimulated, when there is a gagging in the pharynx, on that time there is vomiting, and on that time this way the vomiting is induced. You can take care of the vomiting if you can have an antagonist for those receptors. And for 5-HT3, we have got cetron group of drugs like janicetron, palocetron, etc. Janicetron, ondansetron, this can be given by, some drugs can be given by the oral route, some drugs can be given by parenteral route. Cetron can also be given for the hyperemesis gravidarum, that is in emesis during pregnancy, but other drugs should be given with prior thinking in this pregnancy-induced vomiting. M1 receptors are the hyoscine or the scopolamine, T2 receptors are chlorpromazine, H1 is cyclizine and cinnarizine. Now, one point one has to know, that is when vomiting is encouraged, that condition is called in, in poisoning, antiemetic drugs are never given. And thank you. This is in brief all about the vomiting and antiemetic drugs.